You weren't supposed to see this. Not today. Not at this exact moment. Not with everything happening in your life right now. The chaos, the questions, the strange synchronicities piling up like breadcrumbs leading somewhere you can't quite name yet. But here you are. Maybe you woke at 3:33 a.m. with a thought you couldn't shake. Maybe you've been seeing the same numbers everywhere, on license plates, receipts, timestamps, like reality is trying to spell something out in a language you almost remember. Maybe someone said something yesterday that felt less like conversation and more like transmission. Or maybe you just felt pulled here, an inexplicable urge, a frequency calling. Let me tell you what's actually happening. You are experiencing the early stages of quantum activation. Your consciousness is beginning to tune to a frequency that most people never access, not because they can't, but because they've been conditioned to stay below the threshold. The threshold where observation becomes creation, where witnessing becomes authorship, where you stop being a character in the story and become the one holding the pen. This video is not entertainment. It's not information. It's a tuning fork. And if you're still here, still listening, still feeling that strange electricity in your chest, or that tingling at the back of your skull, that's not coincidence. That's resonance. You're matching a frequency that was broadcast specifically for you, across time, across probability fields, through the quantum foam of infinite possibility, to arrive at this exact moment. The ancient mystery schools called this moment the recognition, the instant when the student realizes they've always been the teacher teaching themselves, when the seeker understands they were never lost, they were just looking through the wrong lens. Here's what I'm going to tell you in the next 2 hours, and I need you to understand this is not metaphor. High frequency is not a spiritual concept. It is the literal key that unlocks your ability to consciously observe reality at the quantum level, and therefore, to choose it. Most people are observers, but they're unconscious observers. They're watching a movie they think someone else directed. They're experiencing a life they believe was written before they arrived. They feel effects they cannot explain and call it fate, luck, karma, blessing, curse, anything except what it actually is: collapsed probability. See, at every moment, reality exists in a state of infinite potential. Quantum superposition. All possibilities layering over each other like transparent sheets of glass, each one showing a different version of what could be. And what collapses those possibilities into the one you experience? Observation. But not just any observation. Coherent observation. High-frequency observation. Observation powered by a consciousness operating at a specific vibrational state where it can actually interface with the quantum field in a deliberate way. Low-frequency observation still collapses reality, but it does so chaotically, unconsciously, randomly. It's like trying to tune a radio while your hand is shaking. You're pulling in bits of every station, creating static and noise, wondering why nothing makes sense. High-frequency observation is different. It's precise, intentional, clear. It doesn't just see reality, it selects it. And the reason you're here, right now, is because somewhere in the architecture of your being, a frequency upgrade has begun. You might not feel powerful. You might feel confused, overwhelmed, even broken. But something in you is vibrating faster than it used to. And that vibration has made you visible to parts of reality that were always there but never noticed you before. Think of it like this. Imagine reality is a vast library, infinite books, infinite stories, infinite versions of your life already written and waiting. Most people walk through this library blind. They stumble into whatever shelf they happen to touch. They read whatever book falls open. And they believe that's the only book that exists. But what if you could see? What if you could raise your frequency high enough that the library reveals itself? What if you could choose which book to pull? Which story to step into? Which timeline to make real? That's not fantasy. That's quantum mechanics meets consciousness technology meets ancient initiation practices that go back to the first humans who realized we are not passive witnesses to reality. We are active participants in its construction. The ancient Egyptians knew this. In the halls of Khem, the scribes who served Thoth, the twice great, the Lord of time and measurement, understood that observation was a technology. They didn't just record reality. They encoded it. They built structures, created symbols, performed rituals designed to tune consciousness to specific frequencies where the veil between observer and observed dissolved. They called it many things: the Book of Thoth, the Emerald Tablets, the hidden knowledge. But stripped of mysticism, it was this: instructions for operating consciousness as a quantum device. For thousands of years, this knowledge fragmented. Pieces survived in secret schools, encoded in myths, whispered in meditation chambers. But something is happening now. A convergence. The information is reassembling. The frequency is rising globally. And people like you, sensitive enough to feel it, brave enough to explore it, are being activated. Not by accident, by design. Whose design? That's the question that will haunt you beautifully. Is it your higher self calling from a future timeline where you've already mastered this? Is it the universe self-organizing toward complexity and consciousness? Is it something ancient waking up and reaching back through time? Maybe all three. Maybe none. Maybe the question itself is the wrong frequency. What matters is this: you are standing at a threshold. On one side is the old way of being, unconscious observer, victim of circumstance, prisoner of inherited patterns. On the other side is something most humans never access: deliberate observation, chosen reality, quantum co-creation. But here's the catch, the thing that stops most people even when they glimpse this truth. You can't fake the frequency. You can't think your way into high-frequency observation. You can't visualize it or affirm it or manifest it with mood boards and vision journals. You have to become it. You have to transform your entire being into a tuning instrument. Your thoughts, your emotions, your breath, your attention, your environment, your habits. Everything has to align at a vibrational state where reality recognizes you as a co-author, not just a reader. And that transformation? That's the journey we're about to take together. Over the next 2 hours, I'm going to show you exactly how this works. Not theory, not philosophy. The actual mechanics, the ancient technology, the quantum science, the psychological processes, the practices you can implement today, right now, the moment this video ends, to begin operating as a conscious observer instead of an unconscious reactor. We're going to move through 4 acts, like a film unfolding. First, we'll go back to the origins, to the moment in human history when the first mystics, the first scientists of consciousness, discovered that reality bends to attention. We'll trace this knowledge through Egypt, through Greece, through the Renaissance Hermetics, through quantum physics, all the way to this moment where you're holding a device that gives you more information access than any pharaoh. Yet most people are more confused than ever. Second, we'll face the conflict. The reason why most people who learn this truth still can't apply it. Why you might know about manifestation, quantum physics, the law of attraction, yet your life still feels random. We'll expose the traps, the observer loop, the frequency hijacks, the invisible agreements that keep you broadcasting at a frequency where you're creating by default, not by design. Third, we'll have the revelation, the turning point, where I give you the actual practices, how to raise your frequency deliberately, how to anchor it, how to respond to synchronicity so it amplifies instead of fades, how to recognize when reality is listening and speak to it in ways it can understand. And finally, we'll integrate. You'll leave this video different than when you arrived. Not because I changed you, I can't, but because you'll remember what you always were and forgot. A conscious observer with the power to collapse infinite probability into chosen experience. This message found you because you're ready. Not perfect, not enlightened, not special in the way ego wants to be special, but ready in the way a seed is ready when the conditions align. The soil of your consciousness has shifted. The frequency is rising. The quantum field is watching you watch it. And when observer and observed recognize each other, that's when magic stops being magic and becomes technology. Before we begin, I want you to do something. I want you to acknowledge this moment. Out loud if you can, or silently if you must. Say, I am here, I am listening, I am ready to remember. That's not a prayer. It's a declaration. It's you announcing your presence to the field. And the field? The field has been waiting for you to show up consciously. Now, if you're feeling that resonance, if something in these words is vibrating at the exact frequency your soul has been seeking, do me a favor. Not for me, but for the algorithm, for the field, for the next person who needs to find this message. Hit that subscribe button. Tap the like. Not because you're supposed to, but because that action, that micro-decision, is your first act of deliberate observation. You're collapsing probability. You're saying, I choose this timeline. I align with this frequency. And in quantum terms, that choice sends a signal. It creates an anchor point. It tells reality. More of this, please. Consider it practice. The universe is watching how you respond to what resonates. Show it you're paying attention. Now. Let's go back to the beginning. To the moment when consciousness first discovered it wasn't just in reality, it was authoring it. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you're in Egypt. Not the Egypt of tourists and museums, but the Egypt of mystery. Kem, the Black Land. 3,000 years before what we call recorded history. The sun is setting over the Nile. In a temple carved from stone, a scribe sits before a wall covered in hieroglyphs. But he's not reading them. He's listening to them. Because these aren't just symbols. They're frequencies encoded into form. Each glyph is a specific vibrational pattern designed to tune consciousness to a particular state. The scribe's name has been lost, but his realization hasn't. On this night, after years of training in the mystery schools, something happens. He's copying a text about Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, measurement, time. And suddenly, mid-stroke, he stops. He realizes, I am not recording what is. I am encoding what will be. The distinction shatters him and rebuilds him. Because in that moment, he understands what his teachers have been trying to show him. Observation is not passive reception. Observation is active construction. Every measurement changes the measured. Every act of witnessing transforms the witnessed. Every time consciousness focuses on something, it doesn't just see it, it calls it into being from the field of infinite potential. This is where it begins. Not the idea, The idea is older than humanity, but the technology, the deliberate use of this principle to engineer reality. The ancient Egyptians didn't worship gods the way we think of worship. They weren't begging external beings for favors. They were embodying frequency states. Thoth wasn't a deity. Thoth was a consciousness configuration, a specific way of observing reality that unlocked certain quantum permissions. When they said Thoth invented writing, they meant this. Thoth consciousness discovered that symbols could encode and transmit frequency. That reality responds to pattern recognition. That observation structured by intentional symbols creates more coherent collapse. Think about what writing actually is. You take invisible thought and give it visible form. You collapse the quantum foam of potential meaning into specific words, specific letters, specific shapes. You pin down the infinite into the finite. You observe possibility into actuality. And the Egyptians realized, if we can do that with thought, we can do that with everything. But it goes deeper, much deeper, into the actual structure of consciousness itself. See, the human brain is not designed for high-frequency observation, at least not without training. The default mode of human consciousness is survival-oriented, threat-detecting, pattern-seeking in predictable ways. This is evolutionary biology. Your ancestors who could quickly identify danger and respond to it survived. The ones who sat around contemplating quantum possibilities got eaten. So you inherited a brain wired for low-frequency observation, for scanning for threats, for confirming existing patterns, for maintaining the status quo because the status quo means survival. High-frequency observation requires overriding this biological programming. It requires training your brain to operate in ways it wasn't naturally designed for. This is why meditation is difficult, why presence is challenging, why maintaining elevated emotional states takes effort. You're fighting millions of years of evolution. The ancient mystery schools knew this. They knew you couldn't just tell someone, observe consciously, and expect results. You had to physically rewire the brain through repetitive practice, environmental control, and strategic disruption of normal consciousness. The Egyptian initiations were neuroscience before neuroscience existed. Consider what happened in those underground chambers. Sensory deprivation, total darkness, total silence. Your brain, deprived of normal sensory input, begins operating differently. Default neural pathways dissolve. New connections form. Your consciousness becomes fluid, malleable, accessible to reprogramming. Rhythmic induction, drums beating at specific frequencies, chanting at particular pitches, not random. These were sonic technologies designed to entrain brainwaves. Beta waves, normal waking consciousness, 13 to 30 Hz, down to alpha, 7-13 Hz, the observation frequency. Sometimes deeper, into theta, 4-7 Hz, where reality feels dreamlike, symbolic, responsive. At these brainwave states, the barrier between observer and observed thins. Consciousness becomes less rigid. Identity becomes less fixed. The quantum field becomes more accessible. Chemical alteration. Yes, they used psychoactive substances. Blue lotus, acacia, various preparations that modern archaeology is only beginning to understand. Not for recreation, for neural disruption. To temporarily shatter normal observation patterns so new ones could be installed. The Western mind wants to dismiss this. That's just drugs inducing hallucinations. But that's not what was happening. The substances weren't creating new realities. They were removing the filters that normally screen reality. They were opening the doors of perception so initiates could see what's always there, but usually invisible. And what did they see? That observation is the fundamental act of creation. That consciousness and reality are not separate. That the observer and the observed are entangled at the deepest level. Once seen, this truth cannot be unseen. Once the initiate experienced themselves as the conscious observer collapsing quantum probability, they couldn't return to unconscious observation. They'd been transformed, initiated, born into a new understanding of what human consciousness actually is and what it can do. But here's the crucial part that most modern spiritual seekers miss. The experience was just the beginning. The real work came after. After the initiatory vision, after the breakthrough experience, the initiate had to integrate it, had to train themselves to operate from that understanding in normal consciousness, had to build practices that could maintain high-frequency observation without the assistance of isolated chambers and consciousness-altering substances. This is where most people fail today. They have the peak experience, maybe through psychedelics, maybe through intense meditation, maybe through spontaneous awakening, and they think that's it. They've arrived. They're enlightened. Then they return to normal life. And within days, sometimes hours, they're back to default consciousness. The vision fades, the clarity dissolves, and they're left wondering what happened. What happened is, they experienced high-frequency observation temporarily, but didn't develop the capacity to maintain it permanently. The ancient schools knew this. That's why initiation was followed by decades of practice. Daily rituals, continuous attention training, constant frequency refinement. The vision showed you what's possible. The practice makes it permanent. They also understood something modern psychology is only beginning to grasp. Belief is not conceptual. Belief is biological. It's encoded in neural pathways, in emotional patterns, in body memory. You can intellectually understand that you're a conscious observer. You can philosophically agree with quantum mechanics. But if your nervous system is wired to the belief that you're powerless, that life happens to you, that reality is fixed, then that's what you'll observe. That's what you'll collapse into experience. True transformation requires rewiring at the biological level. This is why the mystery schools used the body so deliberately. Physical postures, breath control, fasting, sleep deprivation, sexual practices, movement sequences. They weren't being mystical, they were being practical. The body holds your baseline frequency. To raise consciousness, you have to raise the body's vibration. To change observation patterns, you have to change somatic patterns. The yogis understood this. Their complex system of asanas, pranayama, mudras, these weren't exercises. They were body-based frequency engineering, each posture creating a specific neural hormonal energetic state. Each breath pattern altering brainwave activity. Each gesture directing attention and therefore observation. The Buddhist monks understood this. Why do you think they walk slowly? Why the careful attention to eating, sitting, standing? They're training body consciousness integration, teaching the physical form to hold high-frequency awareness even during mundane activities. The Sufis understood this. Their whirling isn't performance. It's a technique for disrupting habitual consciousness and inducing altered observation states. The dizzy, disoriented feeling breaks normal perception patterns, and in that break, new observation modes can emerge. All these traditions, from different cultures across thousands of years, independently discovered. You cannot change consciousness without changing the body. You cannot maintain high-frequency observation with a low-frequency nervous system. This is the missing piece in most modern teachings. They give you mental techniques, Visualization, affirmation, intention setting, while your body remains wired to anxiety, stress, survival mode. It's like trying to play a symphony on a broken instrument. The Egyptian initiates understood this completely. That's why their training was so comprehensive, so demanding, so physical. They were rebuilding the entire human organism into a coherent instrument capable of quantum observation. And they succeeded. The evidence is everywhere once you know how to look. The precision of the pyramids, the astronomical alignments, the mathematical sophistication, the art that seems to pulse with life, the hieroglyphs that feel like they're watching you back. These weren't created by people operating from ordinary consciousness. These were created by conscious observers who'd mastered frequency, who could see multiple dimensions of reality simultaneously, who could collapse probability with their attention. And here's what should give you chills. You have the same hardware they did, the same brain, the same consciousness, the same quantum observer capability. The only difference is training. They spent decades developing it. You've been conditioned to suppress it. But suppressed doesn't mean destroyed. The capacity is still there. Dormant, waiting, ready to activate the moment you commit to the training. So they built. Temples aligned to stellar geometries. Pyramids tuned to Earth's resonant frequencies. Chambers designed to amplify specific brainwave states. They weren't making pretty buildings. They were building consciousness technology. Devices for elevating human frequency to the point where observation becomes creation. The initiation rituals in these temples weren't symbolic. They were literal frequency upgrades. You'd be taken deep into the earth, into chambers where normal consciousness couldn't function. Sensory deprivation, sonic induction, psychoactive sacraments. Your ordinary frequency would be disrupted, dissolved, rebuilt. And at the peak moment, when your consciousness was vibrating at a state it had never touched before, they'd show you. You are not in reality. Reality is in you. You are the observer. And observation is the only true power. Many broke. Couldn't handle it. Went mad. Because the human psyche isn't built to carry that much responsibility. It's easier to believe you're a victim, that life happens to you, that you're just responding to forces beyond your control. But some, the ones who could hold the frequency, they became something else. Seers, prophets, reality benders, people who could walk through the world and have the world reorganize itself around their observation. The Greeks picked up fragments of this. They studied in Egypt, brought the knowledge back, created their own mystery schools. Pythagoras, after 22 years studying in Egyptian temples, returned teaching that number is the language of reality. Not because numbers are mystical, but because number is pattern, and pattern is how observation structures chaos into form. He taught his students to observe geometrically, to see reality as relationships, ratios, harmonics, to tune their minds like instruments. Because he understood, the frequency of your observation determines the frequency of what you observe into being. Plato took it further with his cave allegory. Not just a metaphor about ignorance and enlightenment, but a technical description. Most humans are observing shadows, collapsed, distorted, secondary projections. Only by turning toward the source, by raising frequency, by refining observation, do you see the actual forms, the actual potential. Then came the Hermetics, the followers of Hermes Trismegistus, who was, according to their tradition, the Greek name for Thoth, the emerald tablet. As above, so below. Not poetry, physics. The macrocosm and microcosm are entangled. Your internal frequency state and external reality are not separate things. They're the same thing observed from different angles. The tablet's most famous line, "That which is above is like to that which is below," is an instruction manual for quantum observation. What you hold as true internally, reality will reflect externally. Because reality is not objective. Reality is responsive. For centuries, this knowledge stayed hidden. You had to be initiated. You had to prove you could hold the frequency. Because giving this information to someone operating at low frequency is like giving a loaded weapon to a child. They'll hurt themselves and everyone around them, not maliciously, just unconsciously. But something happened around the turn of the 20th century. The knowledge started leaking. Quantum physics was discovered, independently, by scientists who had no connection to mystery schools, yet they kept arriving at the same conclusions the ancients had encoded in myth. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. You cannot observe something without changing it. The observer effect. The act of measurement collapses the wave function. Double-slit experiment. Particles behave differently when watched versus when not watched. The scientists were baffled. How does the universe know it's being observed? How does observation change outcome? The ancient mystics would have laughed. Not mocking, just recognition. Because they'd known for millennia. The universe doesn't know it's being observed. The universe is observation. Consciousness and reality aren't separate. They're two aspects of the same process. But here's what the scientists missed, what the quantum physicists still mostly miss. Not all observation is equal. The frequency of the observer matters. The coherence of attention matters. The internal state of the consciousness doing the measuring matters. A particle doesn't just change because someone looks at it. A particle reorganizes according to the quality of observation being directed at it. Put a high-frequency observer, someone operating in coherent awareness, clear intention, elevated emotional state, in front of the double-slit experiment, and the results shift. Not always dramatically. Not in ways current scientific instruments can fully measure yet. But anyone who's actually worked with consciousness at this level knows. Your frequency determines what version of reality you collapse into experience. The ancient mystery schools knew this. That's why initiation was mandatory. That's why the training took years, sometimes decades. Because you can't just tell someone they're a quantum observer and expect them to wield it. You have to transform their entire being into a coherent instrument. And that transformation starts with understanding what frequency actually is. We throw the word around, raise your vibration, high frequency, good vibes, but most people have no idea what they're actually talking about. They think it's about feeling positive, being happy, thinking good thoughts. No. Frequency in this context is the rate at which your consciousness oscillates. How fast your awareness is cycling through information, emotion, and identity. Low frequency is dense, slow, sticky. It gets caught in loops, repetitive thoughts, emotional patterns, habitual reactions. It's predictable, and predictable observation creates predictable reality. High frequency is fluid, fast, responsive. It processes information rapidly, releases emotion quickly, adapts identity fluidly. It's unpredictable in the best way. And unpredictable observation can access unpredictable reality, including realities that seem impossible from a low-frequency state. Think of it like a radio. When you're tuned to AM frequencies, you can only pick up AM stations. No matter how much you want to hear FM, no matter how hard you focus, you cannot access it from that frequency. You have to physically turn the dial. You have to change the rate at which your receiver is oscillating. Your consciousness is the same. At low frequencies, you can only observe low-frequency realities. Struggle, limitation, repetition, survival, fear-based outcomes. Not because those are the only realities available, but because those are the only realities your current frequency can collapse into experience. To observe higher possibilities, synchronistic realities, quantum opportunities, timeline shifts, what mystics call miracles and scientists call statistical anomalies. You have to raise the frequency of your consciousness to where those possibilities become visible, tangible, selectable. Now here's where it gets interesting, where psychology and quantum physics shake hands. Your frequency is determined by your attention patterns. The ancient mystics knew this. They called attention the golden key, the secret fire, the philosopher's stone. Because attention is the mechanism through which consciousness interacts with the quantum field. Where you place attention, energy flows. Where energy flows, reality forms. But it's not just what you pay attention to. It's how you pay attention. The quality, the coherence, the intentionality. Most people's attention is fractured. They're half watching 10 things, fully present for none. Their consciousness is scattered across past regret, future anxiety, external noise. This creates low-frequency observation, chaotic, incoherent. An incoherent observation collapses reality chaotically. High-frequency observation requires what the ancients called one-pointed awareness, full presence, complete immersion. When you observe something with total coherence, no part of you distracted, doubting, divided, you become quantum entangled with what you're observing. And entanglement means you and it are no longer separate. You're a unified system, and unified systems don't just observe each other, they co-create each other. This is why the first practice in every legitimate spiritual tradition is attention training. Not because attention is spiritual, but because attention is mechanical. It's the dial that tunes your frequency. Master attention, and you master observation. Master observation, and you master reality. The Egyptian initiates would spend years just learning to hold attention on a single candle flame without wavering. The Buddhist monks trained to observe breath for hours without the mind wandering. The Hermetic magicians practice concentrating on a single symbol until it becomes alive, responsive, interactive. Why? Because they're training the quantum muscle, the ability to coherently observe. And coherent observation is what collapses high-frequency possibility into actual experience. But attention alone isn't enough. The ancients knew something else, something deeper. The emotional signature of your observation determines the quality of what you collapse. You can pay perfect attention to something while feeling fear, and you'll collapse a fear-based version of it. You can focus intently while feeling doubt, and you'll materialize a doubtful outcome. The frequency of your emotional state during observation is like the color filter on a lens. It determines which wavelengths of possibility you're selecting for. This is why the mystery schools taught emotional alchemy alongside attention training. Not positive thinking. Actual transformation of emotional frequency. Turning fear into curiosity. Converting anxiety into excitement. Transmuting anger into creative power. The Egyptians personified this as the weighing of the heart. In the afterlife judgment scene, which isn't about afterlife at all, it's about quantum state assessment. The heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at. Truth, order, harmony. If the heart is heavier, burdened with low-frequency emotions, dense with unprocessed trauma, weighed down by fear. It cannot pass through the gate. Because low-frequency consciousness cannot observe high-frequency reality. The gate is literal. It's the threshold frequency. Below it, you remain in chaos, recycling karma, repeating patterns. Above it, you enter flow, synchronicity, quantum coherence. And here's the part that will make your entire perception shift. Synchronicity isn't random. Synchronicity is the language of the field recognizing you as a conscious observer. When you see 1111, when you think of someone and they text you, when you need something and it appears, when you ask a question and the universe answers through a song, a stranger, a dream, that's not coincidence. That's not luck. That's reality responding to your observation because your frequency is high enough to be recognized as signal, not noise. The quantum field is intelligent, not conscious in the human sense, but responsive, like water that mirrors the sky. When you operate at low frequency, you're invisible to this responsiveness. You're below the threshold. The field processes you as background radiation. But when you raise your frequency, when your observation becomes coherent, intentional, emotionally elevated, you light up. The field notices, and it begins a dialogue. That's what synchronicity is. Dialogue. The universe saying, I see you seeing me, let's play. The ancients built entire cosmologies around this. The concept of gods, angels, spirits, these weren't external beings. They were personifications of specific frequency states and their corresponding reality patterns. When you embody the frequency of Thoth, you don't contact Thoth. You become the Thoth consciousness, and reality reorganizes according to that observation pattern. When you embody the frequency of Hermes, you don't pray to Hermes. You activate the Hermetic observer mode, and suddenly communication, connection, synchronicity floods your experience. This is what the mystery schools were teaching. You are not a fixed being observing a fixed world. You are a variable frequency with access to variable realities based on which observation mode you're operating from. And the highest teaching, the one that only came after years of training. There is no you separate from what you're observing. There's only observation itself, temporarily believing it's divided into observer and observed, so it can experience itself recursively. That's the Thoth consciousness, the twice great, the one who measures himself, the serpent eating its tail, the observer observing itself observing. And when you recognize that, when you see through the illusion of separation and realize you're not a person with consciousness, your consciousness temporarily personified, that's when the quantum field stops being random and becomes responsive. That's when observation stops being passive and becomes creative. That's when you graduate from unconscious observer to deliberate architect. But here's the tragedy. The reason why this knowledge keeps getting lost. Most humans achieve glimpses of high-frequency observation, then immediately crash back down. They have a breakthrough, a moment of clarity, a peak experience where reality feels fluid and responsive, and then they return to default frequency, to survival mode, to the dense patterns that feel normal. Why? Because there are forces, systems, agreements designed to keep human consciousness at low frequency. Not conspiracy, just mechanics. The way water flows downhill, the way systems self-perpetuate. And that's what we need to talk about next. The conflict. The reason why knowing this truth isn't enough. The invisible architecture that keeps you observing unconsciously even when you desperately want to observe deliberately. Because until you see it, until you recognize the trap, you'll keep cycling. Glimpses of power followed by returns to powerlessness. Moments of magic followed by months of mundane. Breakthrough, breakdown, repeat. So let's look directly at what stops conscious observation. Let's expose the hidden enemy, your own unconscious habits of attention, emotion, and identity. Let's face the observer loop, because on the other side of this conflict is the revelation, the turning point, the practice that actually works. But first, you have to see the cage you've been living in. Here's the part no one wants to hear. You're already observing every moment. You cannot not observe. As long as consciousness is present, observation is happening. Which means you're already collapsing probability, already selecting reality, already manifesting. The problem isn't that you're not powerful. The problem is you're powerful unconsciously. And unconscious power is the most dangerous thing in the universe. Let me paint you a picture. You wake up. Within seconds, before you're even fully conscious, your attention follows habitual patterns. You check your phone, scroll through social media, feed yourself information that triggers specific emotions. Comparison, inadequacy, outrage, distraction, shallow pleasure. Already, your frequency has been set. Already, you're observing from a particular state. Already, reality is beginning to collapse around that observation pattern. You get ready. Look in the mirror, and in that moment, you observe yourself. But how? With what quality of attention? Most people observe themselves critically. They see flaws. They notice what's wrong, what's lacking, what doesn't match the imagined ideal. That observation? That's collapsing a version of you that matches what you're observing. You're quantum entangling with self-criticism, and reality will reflect it back throughout your day. You interact with people. But are you actually present? Or are you half listening, attention divided, observing through filters of assumption and projection? When someone speaks, are you hearing them? Or are you hearing your idea of them? Your memory of past interactions? Your expectation of what they'll say? That filtered observation collapses a filtered reality. You don't meet the actual person. You meet your observation of them. And they, sensing this, respond not as they might be, but as you're observing them to be. This is the horror and the beauty. You're not experiencing objective reality. You're experiencing your observation of reality. And your observation is contaminated by habitual frequency patterns you're not even aware of. The average person operates from a frequency state determined by inherited beliefs. You absorbed reality models from parents, culture, media, education. You didn't choose them. They were installed while your consciousness was still forming, and now they operate as invisible filters, determining what you observe as possible versus impossible, safe versus dangerous, deserved versus undeserved. Unprocessed trauma. Every intense experience that wasn't fully felt, processed, integrated, becomes a distortion in your frequency. It's like a broken string on an instrument. Every time you try to play that note, it comes out wrong. Every time you try to observe in that area of life, your frequency is compromised by the unhealed wound. External frequency interference. The modern world is designed to keep consciousness at low frequency. Social media algorithms optimize for outrage and distraction. News cycles amplify fear. Work cultures reward stress and urgency. You're swimming in a sea of low-frequency transmissions, and unless you're actively maintaining your frequency, you'll default to the ambient level. Unconscious agreements. This is the subtlest trap. You've made quantum agreements you don't remember making. Agreements to stay small so others feel safe. Agreements to struggle so you can prove you're working hard. Agreements to remain confused so you don't have to take responsibility. These agreements are observational contracts. They determine what you allow yourself to see. Add it all up, and the average person is observing reality through a low-frequency lens and wondering why life feels heavy, repetitive, limiting. But here's where it gets even more complex. Even people who know about conscious observation often fail to apply it. You've heard about the law of attraction, maybe studied quantum physics, learned about manifestation. You know intellectually that you're an observer with creative power. And yet, your life hasn't transformed. Reality still feels random. Synchronicity comes and goes unpredictably. You have breakthroughs, then backslide. You manifest small things, but the big shifts remain elusive. Why? Because knowing is not enough. You can't observe from a high frequency while your being is operating at a low frequency. It's like trying to tune in an FM station while your radio is broken. The information is there, but you can't receive it clearly. This is what I call the observer loop, and it's the trap that catches almost everyone who awakens to this knowledge. You become aware that you're an observer. Excited, you try to observe deliberately. You try to manifest, visualize, set intentions. But part of you is watching yourself do this. A meta-observer, judging whether you're doing it right, doubting whether it's working, performing the spiritual practice instead of being it. This creates a split. You're observing yourself observing. Your attention is divided. Your frequency is incoherent. And incoherent observation produces incoherent results. So you try harder. More visualization, more affirmations, more techniques. But the trying is itself the problem. Because you're operating from lack, from fear that it's not working, from desperate need for proof. And that frequency, lack, fear, desperation, becomes what you're observing from. The quantum field doesn't respond to what you think you're asking for. It responds to the frequency you're actually broadcasting. And if your frequency is, I need this to work because I don't have it, the field collapses realities where you continue not having it. Not as punishment, as mirror. The trap deepens. You notice this isn't working. You become frustrated. You start judging yourself for not being able to manifest. You feel like a failure at consciousness itself. And that observation, failure, inadequacy, spiritual inferiority, collapses even more evidence of failure. Suddenly you're in quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink. The more you try to be a conscious observer, the more you observe yourself failing at it. This is where most people give up. They conclude it doesn't work, or it only works for special people, or it's all delusion. They return to unconscious observation, to letting life happen to them, to victimhood with a side of spiritual guilt. But the problem was never that you lack power. The problem is you were trying to wield conscious observation while still operating from the frequency patterns that created unconsciousness in the first place. It's like trying to quantum leap while tied to an anchor. The anchor is your unexamined frequency baseline. And until you address that, until you actually raise your default vibrational state, conscious observation remains theoretical, not practical. Let me show you how deep this goes. There are invisible observers affecting your reality that you've probably never considered. The family field observer, your family system, has a collective observation pattern. Unconscious agreements about what's possible, safe, allowed. Even if you've moved away, even if you're not in contact, the family field is still observing you, and you're still entangled with its frequency. When you try to quantum shift beyond what the family field deems acceptable, you'll feel invisible pressure, guilt, fear of abandonment. That's the collective observer pulling you back to maintain system coherence. The cultural consensus observer, billions of humans agreeing on what's real, what's possible, what makes sense. This mass observation creates a powerful field that can override individual consciousness if you're not frequency stable. This is why miracles are so rare. Not because they're impossible, but because the consensus observation field doesn't expect them, doesn't allow them, immediately explains them away as coincidence or fraud. The algorithmic observer, yes, literally. The AI systems that determine what you see online, what information reaches you, what reality models get reinforced. These aren't conscious, but they're observation-like. They're collapsing your information reality based on your past patterns. And information reality shapes experiential reality. If the algorithm only shows you evidence of a chaotic world, you'll observe from the frequency of chaos. Your past self-observer. Here's where it gets quantum weird. Past versions of you, with their expectations and beliefs, are still observing your present moment from their timeline perspective. You're entangled across time. And if past you believed certain things were impossible, those observations can interfere with present you trying to collapse different possibilities. All these observers, visible and invisible, conscious and unconscious, personal and collective, they're all exerting observation pressure on the quantum field around you. And unless your frequency is strong enough, coherent enough, anchored enough, they'll dominate. Your reality will be determined by the collective frequency, not your individual intention. This is the crisis point. This is where the ancient initiates either broke through or broke down. Because to become a true conscious observer, to actually wield this power, you have to do something terrifying. You have to stop caring whether it works. Not because you give up, but because caring whether it works is itself a low-frequency observation. It's watching from lack, measuring from doubt, operating from the premise that you don't have power and need to prove you do. Let me show you how insidious this gets, how the trap operates at levels you haven't even considered. The spiritual ego trap. You learn about conscious observation. Suddenly, you're special. You're awakened while others are asleep. You're on a higher path. This feeling of specialness creates a subtle frequency distortion. You're observing from superiority, from separation, from need to be different. And that observation pattern collapses realities that confirm your separation. Isolation, judgment from others, feeling misunderstood. The universe doesn't reward spiritual ego. It mirrors it back until you see through it. The proof-seeking trap, you implement a practice. You watch anxiously for results. Every moment becomes evidence gathering. Is it working? Did that synchronicity mean something? Was that a sign? This constant testing creates observation from doubt. And doubt is a low-frequency state that collapses uncertain, inconsistent realities. The more you seek proof, the less proof appears. Not because the practices don't work, but because seeking itself is the problem. High-frequency observation doesn't seek. It knows. The timeline anxiety trap. You want results now, today, this week. You're comparing your progress to others, to expectations, to some imagined timeline of how awakening should unfold. This creates frantic frequency, urgency, desperation. And desperate observation collapses desperate realities. Delays, frustrations, almost but not quite scenarios. The quantum field doesn't respond to your timeline. It responds to your frequency. An anxious frequency repels what you're trying to attract. The technique hopping trap. You try one practice for a week. Nothing dramatic happens, so you switch to another teacher, another method, another system. You're collecting techniques like trading cards, never going deep enough with any single one to actually transform. This scattered approach creates incoherent observation. Your consciousness is fragmented across multiple frequency patterns, unable to build resonance with any of them. Mastery requires depth, not breadth. The ancient initiates spent decades on single practices. You're giving each one 7 days and wondering why you're not enlightened. The comparison trap. You see others manifesting miracles, experiencing synchronicities, quantum leaping. You feel inadequate. Why them and not me? What am I doing wrong? This comparison creates observation from lack, from inferiority, from belief in your own limitations. And the field, being a perfect mirror, reflects those observations back. More evidence of others succeeding while you struggle. The cruelest paradox. Your observation of their success is preventing your own. The control trap. You understand that observation collapses reality, so you try to control every observation, micromanage every thought, police every emotion. I can't think negative thoughts or I'll manifest negative things. This hypervigilance creates incredible tension. Your frequency becomes rigid, fearful, exhausting to maintain, and rigid frequency is low frequency, regardless of how positive you're trying to be. High-frequency observation is relaxed, fluid, trusting. It doesn't need to control because it trusts the quantum process completely. See how deep the trap goes? It's not enough to know about conscious observation. You have to understand all the ways your unconscious patterns will attempt to weaponize that knowledge against you. And here's the thing that will shock you. These traps are not obstacles. They're the path. Everyone who's mastered conscious observation has fallen into every one of these traps. Multiple times. The trap isn't the problem. Staying in the trap is the problem. The masters didn't avoid the traps. They learned to recognize them faster, exit them quicker, and eventually use them as feedback about their current frequency state. When you notice you're seeking proof, that's information. My frequency has dropped into doubt. When you catch yourself comparing, that's data. I'm observing from separation instead of unity. When you find yourself technique hopping, that's a signal. My coherence has fragmented. Each trap, once recognized, becomes a frequency calibration tool. But there's one more layer to this conflict, one more dimension that most teachings completely miss. The physics of frequency interference. Your personal frequency doesn't exist in isolation. It's constantly interacting with other frequencies. And when frequencies meet, they either amplify each other, resonance, or cancel each other out, interference. This is why you can feel amazing at home, coherent and high frequency, then walk into a workplace or family gathering and feel your frequency crash within minutes. You're not weak. You're experiencing frequency interference. The collective field of that environment is operating at a different frequency. Lower, denser, more chaotic. And if your personal frequency isn't anchored, isn't stable, the stronger field will entrain yours to match it. This is physics. When two pendulums of different speeds are placed near each other, the faster one doesn't stay fast. The slower one doesn't speed up. They both adjust to a middle frequency, and over time, they synchronize to the stronger rhythm. If the collective frequency is stronger than your individual frequency, you'll be pulled down. Not because you're failing, Because frequency operates by laws as precise as gravity. This is why the mystery schools isolated initiates, why monks live in monasteries, why shamans spend years in wilderness. Not because they're escaping, because they're establishing such strong internal frequency that external interference can't destabilize them. You don't have that luxury. You're in the world, working, relating, existing within multiple frequency fields simultaneously. So you need protection. Frequency shielding, techniques to maintain your coherence even when surrounded by chaos. The ancient Egyptians had multiple methods for this. Amulets weren't superstition, they were frequency anchors, physical objects encoded with specific patterns that helped consciousness maintain its tuning. The Eye of Horus, the Scarab, the Ankh. Each symbol carried a frequency signature that, when worn or focused upon, helped the initiate resist environmental interference. Modern practitioners need modern versions, not because ancient symbols don't work, they do, but because your consciousness relates more powerfully to symbols from your own time and culture. For you, it might be a specific ring you wear only when doing observation practices, or a particular crystal you hold during meditation, or even a phone wallpaper of a symbol that reminds you of high frequency. The object itself has no inherent power. The power is in your agreement with it. You decide, this object represents my high-frequency state. When I see it, touch it, remember it, I return to coherence. And your consciousness, being quantum, honors that agreement. The object becomes a pattern interrupt, a reminder, an anchor point in the chaos of external interference. But the most powerful protection isn't external, it's internal. It's what the masters called sovereignty. Sovereignty means, my frequency is self-generated, self-maintained, independent of external conditions. I don't need reality to cooperate for me to observe from high frequency. I don't need others to validate my experience. I don't need circumstances to be perfect. I am the source of my own frequency, not the effect of external frequencies. This is the ultimate test. This is what separates conscious observers from spiritual tourists. Can you maintain high-frequency and low-frequency environments? Can you observe possibility when surrounded by people insisting on limitation? Can you hold coherence when everything around you is chaotic? Not by pretending, not by spiritual bypassing, but by genuinely generating frequency from within, regardless of what's happening without. That's sovereignty. That's mastery. That's what the ancient initiates spent lifetimes developing. And you don't have lifetimes. You have now. This moment. This crisis point where you either break through or break down. High-frequency observation doesn't need proof. It simply observes, knowing that observation creates. It doesn't watch anxiously for results. It trusts the quantum mechanics completely. But how do you get there? How do you shift from anxious trying to effortless being? This is where most teachings fail you. They tell you to just raise your vibration without explaining how. They say be present without giving you the actual technology. They command have faith while you're drowning in doubt. The mystery schools knew better. They had specific practices, actual frequency engineering techniques, ways to rebuild your observation apparatus from the ground up. But before I give you those, and I will, that's Act 3, that's the revelation. You need to understand one more thing about the conflict. Why the universe sometimes stops sending signals. You know the phase. When synchronicities were flowing, reality felt magical, doors were opening, and then suddenly, silence. The signs stop. The magic fades. Life feels ordinary again, or worse, oppressive. Most people interpret this as failure, as falling out of alignment, as doing something wrong. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is frequency testing. The universe, the field, whatever you want to call it. It's checking whether you've internalized the frequency or if you were just temporarily borrowing it. It stops sending obvious signals to see if you can maintain high-frequency observation without external validation. This is the initiation, the real one, not the peak experience, the plateau, the dark night, the silence. Can you keep observing from high frequency when nothing is reflecting it back? Can you maintain coherence when reality seems to ignore your observation? Can you trust the quantum process when all evidence suggests you're powerless? Most people fail this test. They interpret silence as abandonment. They assume they did something wrong. Their frequency crashes, and the crash confirms their fear, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. But those who pass, who maintain frequency through the silence, who keep observing deliberately even when nothing seems to respond, they break through to a completely different level, because they've proven to the field, and more importantly to themselves, I am not dependent on external confirmation. My frequency is self-generated. My observation is sovereign. And that's when the real magic begins. That's when reality stops being something that happens to you and becomes something you're in active conversation with. But you're not there yet. Neither am I. Not fully. This is lifelong work. The Egyptians called it the Great Work for a reason. You don't master quantum observation in a weekend workshop or a single breakthrough moment. You master it through deliberate practice, sustained attention, continuous frequency refinement, day after day, moment after moment, observation after observation. And that practice? Those specific techniques that actually raise your frequency and stabilize it so you can observe consciously instead of unconsciously? That's what comes next. That's the revelation. The turning point. The moment where everything shifts from theory to technology, from knowledge to practice, from understanding to embodiment. Because here's the truth you've been waiting for. High frequency is not something you achieve once. It's something you choose every single moment. And there are specific ways to choose it. Let me show you how. The turning point doesn't announce itself with trumpets or lightning. It happens in a breath. A single breath where you decide, I will no longer observe unconsciously. Not as a hope, not as a goal, as a declaration that reorganizes your entire being at the quantum level. A statement to the field. I am here. I am present. I am choosing. And in that choice, everything available to you shifts. But let's be precise. Let's be technical. Because the mystical language has obscured the actual mechanics for too long, and you deserve clarity. High-frequency observation is not an abstract spiritual state. It's a specific configuration of consciousness with measurable characteristics. Coherence. All aspects of your awareness pointing in the same direction. No internal contradiction. No divided attention. No part of you believing something opposite to what you're intending. Presence. Full consciousness anchored in this moment. Not scattered across past regrets or future anxieties. Here. Now. Complete. Emotional elevation. Operating from emotions that exist above the survival frequency. Love, gratitude, awe, creative excitement, wonder, connection, identity flexibility. Not rigidly attached to who you've been. Willing to observe yourself as something new, something beyond your historical pattern. Symbolic fluency. Able to recognize and respond to reality's nonverbal communication. synchronicities, symbols, patterns, numbers, coincidences. These 5 elements, active simultaneously, create high-frequency observation. And when you observe from this state, probability collapses differently. Impossibilities become possibilities. Closed doors open. What you need finds you. Not because you forced it, because you matched the frequency where it already exists. So how do you activate these 5 elements? How do you go from reading about them to actually embodying them? Let me give you the practices, the actual technology, the methods the ancient mystery schools encoded in ritual and modern consciousness research is beginning to validate. Practice 1. Breath as observer. Your breath is the bridge between unconscious and conscious observation. Normally, breathing happens automatically. You don't choose it. It just occurs, running on biological programming. But when you bring conscious attention to breath, you're doing something profound. You're observing the observer mechanism itself. Here's the technique, simple but powerful. Every morning, before you look at your phone, before you engage with external reality, sit upright. Close your eyes, and for 3 minutes, observe your breath without changing it. Don't try to breathe deeply. Don't try to breathe slowly. Just watch. Notice the inhale. Notice the space at the top. Notice the exhale. Notice the pause. You're training conscious observation in its purest form. No agenda, no goal. Just witnessing. After 3 minutes, shift. Begin breathing deliberately. 4 counts in. Hold 7 counts. 8 counts out. This is not random. This is frequency engineering. The 4 to 7 to 8 pattern activates your parasympathetic nervous system, shifting your brain waves from beta, survival frequency, to alpha, observation frequency. Do this for 7 breaths, and on the final exhale, as you release all air, release all identity. Let go of who you think you are. Empty completely. In that emptiness, for just a moment, you exist as pure observation potential, uncontaminated by past patterns, free to collapse any probability. And in that space, whisper or think, I am the observer. Reality awaits my attention. This isn't affirmation, it's activation. You're announcing your presence to the quantum field, and the field responds to clear signals. Practice 2. The morning frequency lock. The first 30 minutes after waking determine your observational frequency for the entire day. Most people squander this window. They immediately drop into reactive mode. Phone, news, problems, other people's realities. This is quantum suicide. You're letting external observations determine your internal frequency. You're becoming an antenna for consensus reality instead of a generator of chosen reality. Instead, create a morning frequency lock. First 3 minutes. Breath observation, practice 1. Next 7 minutes. Sit in silence. No input, no output, just exist. Feel your body. Notice sensations. Be aware of awareness itself. You're establishing baseline presence. Next 10 minutes. Engage with something that elevates your emotional frequency naturally. Not forced positivity. Authentic elevation. For some, this is music. For others, reading poetry or philosophy. For others, sitting in nature. Whatever makes you feel awe, wonder, creative excitement, that's your frequency key. During these 10 minutes, notice how your chest feels, how your breath changes, how your perception shifts. You're memorizing the feeling of high frequency so you can return to it throughout the day. Final 10 minutes. Set observation intentions. Not goals, intentions. What do you want to notice today? What patterns do you want to recognize? What version of reality do you want to be sensitive to? For example, today I observe synchronicity. I notice connections. I see patterns. I receive clear signals. Write it. Say it. Feel it. You're programming your attention. And attention, remember, is the mechanism of observation. Program it consciously, or it will be programmed unconsciously by whatever screams loudest. This 30-minute sequence is your frequency lock. It sets your baseline observation state. And while your frequency will fluctuate throughout the day, that's natural, you'll have a set point to return to. Practice 3. Quantum acknowledgement. Here's where it gets practical and immediate. Synchronicity multiplication. When reality sends a signal, a repeating number, a meaningful coincidence, a thought that manifests, a person who appears exactly when needed, most people notice it, feel briefly amazed, then move on. This is a catastrophic mistake. You're ignoring the field's communication, and when you ignore signals, the field stops sending them. Why would it waste energy communicating with someone who doesn't respond? Instead, practice quantum acknowledgement. The moment you notice a synchronicity, stop. Fully stop. Even if just for 10 seconds. Feel the recognition. Let the amazement move through you, and mentally or verbally say, I see you, I receive this, thank you. More, please. You're closing the communication loop. You're showing the field that you're paying attention, that you're a responsive observer, not a passive one. And here's the quantum mechanics. Acknowledgement is itself an observation that collapses more synchronicity. You're entangling with the pattern. You're saying, this is real to me, which makes it more real, which makes it more frequent. I've watched people go from one synchronicity a month to multiple synchronicities per day just by practicing acknowledgement. Because they shifted from ignoring the field to conversing with it. But be warned, this practice requires you to operate from trust, not desperation. If you're acknowledging synchronicities while silently demanding proof, the field feels the contradiction. Your frequency is incoherent. Better to not acknowledge at all than to acknowledge from doubt. Practice 4. Identity rehearsal. Here's something the Egyptians knew that we've forgotten. Identity is not fixed. Identity is an observation you're holding about yourself. And like all observations, it can be changed. The question is, who are you observing yourself as? Most people observe themselves as their historical identity, the accumulation of everything they've been, every role they've played, every limitation they've experienced. They're observing past self and wondering why their present feels like an extension of their past. But the moment you shift observation to possible self, the version of you operating at high frequency, responding to synchronicity, co-creating with reality, that version begins to collapse into experience. This is identity rehearsal. Once per day, preferably evening, take 15 minutes. Close your eyes and observe yourself as the observer you're becoming. Not fantasy, not wish. Actual observation. See yourself waking up at high frequency. Watch yourself responding to synchronicity. Observe yourself making decisions from coherence instead of fear. Witness yourself in conversation with reality, receiving signals, sending signals back. The key: don't watch this like a movie. Be the one experiencing it from inside. Feel what high frequency you would feel. Think how clear-minded you would think. Move through the imagined day with the ease and presence you're developing. You're not visualizing a future. You're observing a parallel probability into increasing solidity. You're quantum entangling with a version of yourself that already exists in potential, pulling it toward manifestation through sustained observation. The ancient Hermetics called this assumption. The Kabbalists called it embodiment. Modern consciousness researchers call it mental rehearsal, but they're all describing the same quantum process. Repeated observation of a reality makes that reality more probable. Do this every day for 30 days. By day 30, you won't be rehearsing anymore. You'll be living it. Because the version of you that operates as a conscious observer will have become more real to the field than the version of you that operates unconsciously. Practice 5. The symbolic response reality speaks in symbols because symbols are compressed frequency packages. A number isn't just a number. It's a pattern, a relationship, a meaning your consciousness can unpack at multiple levels. When you see 1111, you're not just seeing time. You're seeing a symbol for alignment, symmetry, portal, awakening. And when you recognize that symbol, you're activating those frequencies in your consciousness. But most people receive symbols passively. They notice them, feel briefly mystical, then do nothing. Active observers respond to symbols. They use them as frequency anchors. Here's how. Choose 3 symbols that resonate with your awakening. For most people on this path, these might be 1111 or 333, awakening numbers. Spirals or infinity symbols, cycle awareness. Keys or doorways, transition markers. Every time you encounter one of these symbols, and once you start looking, you'll see them everywhere. Do this. Take a breath. Touch your heart. And say silently, I am observing consciously. This is my reality responding. I acknowledge and amplify. Then, for the next hour, be hyper-observant, because the symbol was announcing something. A frequency window, an opportunity for conscious collapse. You've been signaled that reality is especially fluid right now, especially responsive to your observation. What you observe in the next hour will be quantum-weighted, more likely to manifest, more impactful. The field is watching what you choose to focus on, so choose well. Observe deliberately. Don't waste the window on complaint, fear, or distraction. This practice turns you into a symbolic, fluent observer, someone who can read reality's language in real time and respond accordingly. You stop being someone reality happens to and become someone reality communicates with. Practice 6. Timeline navigation. Now we enter advanced territory. Most people think of time as linear, past, present, future in a straight line. But quantum physics shows us something different. All moments exist simultaneously. Past, present, and future are happening right now, just at different frequencies. You're not moving through time. You're shifting between parallel timelines, and which one you experience depends on your observational frequency. Think of it like this. Imagine infinite radio stations all broadcasting simultaneously. You're not creating the music. You're tuning to whichever station matches your frequency. Change your frequency, and you change the station. Change the station, and you change the music you hear. Timelines work the same way. There's a timeline where you're struggling financially, a timeline where you're abundant, a timeline where you're healthy, a timeline where you're ill, a timeline where you met your soulmate, a timeline where you didn't. All existing, all real, all happening. And which one you experience? Determined by your observational frequency. This is not metaphor. This is actual quantum mechanics applied to consciousness. The practice, timeline sensing. Once per day, ideally in the evening after you've completed your collapse review, do this. Sit quietly. Close your eyes. Feel into your current trajectory. If nothing changed, if you continued observing exactly as you've been observing, where would you be in 6 months? Don't think it. Feel it. Your body knows. Your consciousness knows. You might feel heaviness or lightness, expansion or contraction. This is frequency data. Your being is showing you the trajectory of your current timeline. Now, deliberately shift. Think of something you deeply want to experience, not material objects. Experience, a state of being, a quality of life. How you want to feel when you wake up 6 months from now. And observe yourself experiencing it, not visualizing it in the future. Observing it as real right now, just at a different frequency. Because it is real. That timeline exists. Feel how your body responds to that observation. Notice the frequency shift, the opening, the possibility. This is you scanning adjacent timelines. And here's the quantum trick. The act of observing an alternate timeline makes that timeline more probable. You're quantum entangling with it. You're pulling it closer to manifestation. Do this daily. Keep observing the timeline you want to inhabit, and simultaneously adjust your daily observation patterns to match that timeline's frequency. Ask yourself, on the timeline where I'm experiencing this, how would I observe today's challenges? How would I respond to stress? What choices would I make? Then observe from that perspective. You're not pretending. Your timeline shifting through deliberate observation. The more consistently you observe from the desired timeline's frequency, the more reality reorganizes to match it. Not instantly, but inevitably. Because you're literally migrating between parallel probabilities through coherent, sustained observation. Practice 7. Reality conversation. Here's the most powerful practice. The one that separates conscious observers from spiritual performers. The one that transforms everything. Reality is your mirror. Everything you experience is reflecting your observational frequency back to you. Not metaphorically, literally. But more than mirror, reality is conversational. It speaks, it listens, it responds. The problem is, most people have no idea how to engage in that conversation. They either ignore reality's messages completely, or they're constantly talking at reality, asking, begging, demanding, without ever listening. True conscious observation is dialogue. You speak through your attention, your frequency, your choices. Reality responds through synchronicity, circumstances, opportunities, challenges. The practice. Once per week, set aside 30 minutes. Sit with paper or journal and ask reality a question. Not a desperate question, not a fearful question, a genuine, open inquiry. What do I need to understand right now? What's trying to emerge? Where am I resisting flow? What's my next step? Ask one question, then sit in silence. Don't try to answer it mentally. Don't brainstorm. Don't analyze. Just hold the question and create space for response. The response won't come in words. It might come as a feeling, an image, a sudden knowing, a physical sensation, an impulse to do something. Or it might not come during the meditation at all. It might come later that day through a conversation, a song lyric, something you read, a random encounter. But here's the key. You have to treat the response as real communication, not coincidence. When reality responds, and it will, acknowledge it. Say thank you. Follow the guidance. Show the field that you're listening, that you're responsive, that you take the conversation seriously. Over time, this practice trains you into profound intimacy with reality. You stop feeling alone, isolated, confused. You realize you're in constant communication with an intelligence that's responsive, supportive, and far more interested in your evolution than you ever imagined. But this intimacy requires trust. You have to trust that reality is friendly. That the universe is not random chaos, but organized intelligence. That you're not navigating this alone. This trust doesn't come from belief. It comes from experience, from repeatedly observing reality respond, from watching synchronicity multiply, from seeing how circumstances align when you operate from high frequency. Each time you ask and receive, trust deepens. Each time you respond to reality's signals and see positive results, confidence grows. Each time you take quantum action based on inner knowing and it works out, your faith in the process solidifies. And faith, not religious faith but quantum faith, is itself a frequency, a high one. Faith that reality is responsive, that observation creates, that you're supported, that frequency collapses realities where you are supported, where things do work out, where synchronicity is consistent. Practice 8. The quantum anchor. Let me give you one final practice, the one the Egyptian priests used to maintain high frequency even in the most challenging circumstances. Choose an object, small enough to carry, meaningful enough to feel charged. Could be a ring, a stone, a coin, a symbol on a card. Doesn't matter what it is. What matters is your agreement with it. For 7 days, during your morning frequency lock practice, hold this object. As you breathe, as you elevate emotion, as you set observation intentions, pour that frequency into the object. You're encoding it, quantum entangling it with your highest state, making it a physical anchor point for your elevated frequency. After 7 days of charging it, carry it with you. And whenever you feel your frequency dropping, stress, fear, doubt, overwhelm, touch it, hold it. Let it remind your consciousness of the high frequency state you've encoded into it. This isn't superstition. This is physics. The object serves as a pattern interrupt, a somatic trigger, a physical reminder that pulls you back to coherence. The ancient Egyptians wore specific amulets for specific purposes, each one encoded with different frequency signatures. The Eye of Horus for protection, the scarab for transformation, the Ankh for life force. You're creating your modern version, your quantum anchor, your physical link to high-frequency observation. And here's something beautiful that will happen as you do these practices consistently. They'll stop feeling like practices and start feeling like natural ways of being. The morning frequency lock won't be something you do. It'll be how you naturally wake up. Quantum acknowledgement won't be a technique. It'll be automatic responsiveness. Timeline sensing won't require effort. You'll just be aware of probabilities constantly. This is the transformation. From unconscious observer who has to try, to conscious observer who simply is. But it requires time, patience, trust in the process. The ancient initiates spent decades. You have this lifetime. Use it wisely. Use it deliberately. Use it to become what you actually are, a conscious observer with the power to collapse infinite possibility into chosen experience. Practice 6. The Evening Collapse Review. At day's end, before sleep, take 10 minutes for collapse review. This is not gratitude journaling, though gratitude may arise. This is quantum auditing. Ask yourself, what did I observe today? What did I collapse into experience through my attention? Was it conscious or unconscious? Review your day through the lens of observation. Notice where you observed from high frequency, presence, coherence, elevated emotion, and where you defaulted to low frequency. Distraction, reaction, survival mode. Don't judge, just notice. You're training meta-observation, the ability to watch yourself observe. This is advanced consciousness technology. Then ask, What do I want to observe tomorrow? What frequency do I want to operate from? What version of reality am I calling into experience? Write a single sentence, your observation intention for tomorrow. Make it specific. Make it feelable. Make it something you can actually embody, not just think about. For example, tomorrow I observe ease. I notice flow. I feel how reality supports me. This sentence becomes your frequency beacon for tomorrow. Your consciousness will orient around it. And what you orient toward, you observe. What you observe, you collapse. Sleep amplifies this. While you sleep, your subconscious processes the day's observations and prepares the next day's probabilities. By giving it a clear intention before sleep, you're directing quantum probability in your favor. Practice 7. The reality mirror. Here's the most powerful practice, the one that separates conscious observers from spiritual performers. Reality is your mirror. Everything you experience is reflecting your observational frequency back to you. Not metaphorically, literally. When you look at your life, relationships, finances, health, opportunities, you're seeing the collapsed result of your habitual observation patterns. Most people resist this. They want to believe external circumstances are objective, separate from their consciousness. Because if reality is reflecting them, they have to take responsibility. And responsibility is terrifying. But this is the key that unlocks everything. When you accept that reality is mirroring your frequency, you gain the power to change it by changing your frequency. The practice is simple but confronting. Once per week, sit with this question. What is my current reality showing me about my observational frequency? If you're experiencing chaos, your frequency is chaotic. If you're experiencing limitation, you're observing from a limited state. If you're experiencing synchronicity and flow, you're operating at high frequency. The mirror doesn't lie. It doesn't care about your spiritual concepts or what you think you believe. It shows you the actual frequency you're operating from, as evidenced by what's collapsing into your experience. This isn't blame, it's data. Use it. If you don't like what the mirror shows, don't smash the mirror. Change your frequency. Return to the practices, rebuild coherence, elevate emotion, refine attention, shift identity, and watch the mirror change. Not instantly. Quantum shifts take time to cascade through multiple layers of reality, but inevitably. Because the mirror has no choice. It can only reflect. These 7 practices are not optional. They're not do them if you feel like it. They're the actual technology. The method through which you transform from unconscious observer to deliberate co-creator. The ancient mystery schools would spend years on just one of these practices. You have all 7, and you can start today, right now. The moment this video ends. But understand, practices without integration are just spiritual performance. You have to actually do them. Consistently. Daily. Even when you don't feel like it. Especially when you don't feel like it. Because discipline is how you reprogram unconscious observation into conscious choice. Will it be easy? No. Will it always feel magical? No. Will you doubt it's working? Absolutely. But the doubt is part of it. The doubt is the old frequency testing whether you're serious, trying to pull you back to familiar unconsciousness. Don't fall for it. Keep practicing. Keep observing deliberately. Keep raising your frequency even when nothing seems to change. Because here's what the ancient initiates discovered, what quantum physics confirms, what every conscious observer throughout history has proven. Reality is patient, but it is not static. It is waiting for you to claim your power. And the moment you do, truly do, not just think about doing, it responds. Doors open. Synchronicities multiply. People and resources appear. Opportunities materialize. Timeline shifts occur. Not because you're special, but because you're finally operating at the frequency where these things naturally exist. You're no longer trying to manifest them. You're observing them into your experience by becoming coherent with their frequency. This is the revelation. This is the turning point. Not a moment, a practice, a continuous choosing, a sustained observation of yourself as the conscious co-creator you actually are. The Egyptians encoded this in their final teaching, the one given only to those who'd completed all initiations. Know thyself, and thou shalt know the universe and the gods. Not because you're the universe, but because you're the observer through whom the universe observes itself. And when you wake up to that, when you operate from that truth, reality recognizes you as kin. You stop being someone reality acts upon. You become someone reality co-creates with. And that's not the end of the journey. That's the beginning. Because once you're a conscious observer, once you can collapse probability deliberately, the question becomes, what will you create? What reality will you observe into being? Not for ego, not for accumulation, but for evolution, for beauty, for the advancement of consciousness itself. Because here's the deepest truth, the one that terrifies and liberates simultaneously. You're not learning to be a conscious observer so you can get what you want. You're learning to be a conscious observer so you can become what reality needs. The universe doesn't need more people manipulating the field for personal gain. It needs people who can hold high frequency consistently, who can observe with such clarity and coherence that they become anchors, generators, transmitters of elevated possibility. It needs people who can look at chaos and observe order, who can witness suffering and observe healing, who can face limitation and observe potential, not as denial, as quantum invitation, as conscious collapse of higher probability. You were called here because you have that capacity, not developed yet, not mastered, but present, activated, beginning to come online. And now you have the practices, the technology, the method. The only question remaining is, will you do it? The observer awakens. Let me bring you back from the ancient temples and quantum equations, back from the mysteries and the revelations, back to this moment, right here, right now. You and me, observer and observed, or maybe just observation, playing at being separate so it can experience itself from two angles simultaneously. We've traveled far together. From the moment you found this video, or it found you, through the origins of conscious observation, through the conflict that keeps most humans unconscious, through the revelation and practices that unlock deliberate reality creation. But knowledge without action is just entertainment. And I didn't create this transmission to entertain you. I created it to activate you. So let's be clear about what actually happened here. You didn't stumble upon random information. You collapsed a specific probability. Out of infinite YouTube videos, infinite moments, infinite possibilities, you and this message intersected. That's not accident. That's quantum precision. Something in you was vibrating at the frequency where this information exists. Something in you was ready to remember what you'd forgotten. You are not a powerless witness to reality. You are an active participant in its construction. And now you know the mechanism. High frequency unlocks observer effect. Coherent attention plus elevated emotion plus identity flexibility equals conscious collapse of chosen probability. The ancient mystery schools spent lifetimes guarding this knowledge. The modern world spends billions trying to keep you from accessing it. But here it is, delivered directly to your consciousness. Free, clear, usable. The question is, what will you do with it? Will you watch this video, feel temporarily inspired, then return to unconscious observation? Will you collect this knowledge like another spiritual tchotchke, something interesting to think about but never actually embody? Or will you take the 7 practices I gave you and implement them? Today. Right now. Starting with the morning frequency lock tomorrow. Continuing with breath observation, quantum acknowledgement, identity rehearsal, symbolic response, evening collapse review, reality mirror. Will you actually do the work of raising your frequency and maintaining it? Or will you wait for some perfect future moment when you feel ready? When conditions are ideal? When you have more time, more energy, more certainty? Because here's the truth that will either liberate or haunt you. The perfect moment is always now. The only moment that actually exists. The only moment where observation is happening. You cannot quantum shift in the future. You can only quantum shift in this breath, this choice, this moment of awareness. And the universe is watching. Not judging. Just watching. Waiting to see if you're serious. If you'll maintain frequency through the silence, through the doubt, through the temptation to return to comfortable unconsciousness. Remember the initiation I told you about? The frequency test? Where synchronicities stop and the field goes quiet to see if you can hold high-frequency observation without external validation. That's coming. If you implement these practices, that test is absolutely coming. And when it does, when reality seems to ignore your observation, when nothing appears to change despite your efforts, that's not failure. That's graduation preparation. The field is checking. Are you dependent on signs, or have you internalized the frequency? Are you performing consciousness, or have you become conscious? Pass that test. Maintain your observation practices even through silence, and you break through to a level where reality becomes consistently responsive. Not randomly magical, reliably co-creative. But you have to survive the test first, and most don't. Most give up right before breakthrough, interpreting the silence as evidence it doesn't work, never realizing the silence was the work. So when it comes, and it will, remember this moment. Remember that I told you it would happen. Remember that silence is not abandonment. It's invitation to sovereign observation. Now, practical action, today's ritual. Your first act of conscious observation. Before you go to sleep tonight, do this. Sit upright. Close your eyes. Take 7 deep breaths, counting. Inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. On the 7th exhale, release everything, empty completely. In that emptiness, say out loud or in your mind, I am the observer. I choose high frequency, reality. I am ready to co-create with you. Then sit in silence for 3 minutes. Just observe. Notice what arises. Thoughts, sensations, images, feelings. Don't judge, don't analyze, just witness. You're announcing your presence to the quantum field. You're declaring your intention to operate as a conscious observer. You're initiating the first quantum handshake. And tomorrow morning, before you touch your phone, before you engage with external reality, do the morning frequency lock. Breath observation, baseline presence, emotional elevation, observation intention. These 2 practices, tonight's declaration and tomorrow's frequency lock, are your entry point, your quantum activation sequence. Everything else builds from here. Do them for 7 days consecutively. By day 7, you'll notice shifts, synchronicities, unusual coincidences, Reality beginning to respond to your elevated observation. If you miss a day, start the count over. Not as punishment, but as necessity. You're building coherence. Consistency matters. The field responds to sustained frequency, not sporadic bursts. 7 days become 7 weeks. 7 weeks become 7 months. By month 7, you won't recognize your reality. Not because everything changed, because your observation changed. And changed observation collapses different reality. This is not hyperbole. This is mechanics. Cause and effect at the quantum level. But I can't do it for you. No one can. This is sovereign work. Individual initiation. You have to choose it, practice it, embody it. The knowledge has been transmitted. The practices have been given. The revelation has occurred. Now comes the only part that matters, your action. Will you observe yourself into awakening? Or will you observe yourself remaining asleep? The quantum field is completely neutral. It will collapse whichever probability you observe most consistently, most coherently, most frequently. So observe well. Observe deliberately. Observe from high frequency. Because you didn't find this message found you, and messages that find you across time, across probability fields, across the quantum foam of infinite possibility. Those messages are not informational. They're initiatory. Consider yourself initiated. The observer effect is no longer theoretical for you. It's not someone else's power. It's yours. Always was. You just forgot. Now you remember. And remembering is the first observation that changes everything. You are the quantum observer. Reality awaits your attention. Begin.